The wind had a name in this part of the country. It wasn't a gentle name whispered by lovers, but a harsh, grating one spoken by farmers with cracked lips and sun-skid brows. It was a wind that carried no relief, only the fine red dust of the plains and the scent of sun-baked earth. For 3 days, this wind had been Evelyn's only constant companion, whipping at the canvas cover of the carriage and working its way through the seams of her simple wool dress, leaving a gritty film on her skin. She sat straight back on the hard wooden bench, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were pale stones. She was 19. At 19, other girls in the small, damp town she'd left behind were thinking of dances, of ribbons for their hair, of stolen glances with boys who worked at the mercantile. Evelyn was thinking of the finality of the horizon. It stretched on forever, a relentless, unbroken line where a pale, washed-out sky met an ocean of brown, dying grass. This was her new home, a place without boundaries. Yet she had never felt more like a prisoner. The arrangement, as her father had called it, had been made with the grim practicality of a livestock sale. There was no romance in it, only desperation, a failed crop, a debt that had grown like a cancer, and a long, unforgiving winter looming ahead had sealed her fate. Her father, a man whose hands had once been gentle but were now gnarled with worry and hard labor, hadn't been able to meet her eyes when he told her. "He's a good man, Evelyn," he'd mumbled, his gaze fixed on a loose floorboard. "A hard worker. He has land. You'll be provided for." "Provided for?" The words echoed in the rhythmic creak of the carriage wheels. It was the same term used for a horse, given a dry stall and a measure of oats. She was a debt settled, a mouth her family no longer had to feed. She understood the necessity of it. She had seen the fear in her mother's eyes, the way she would portion out the cornmeal as if it were gold dust. Love in her world was not about whispered promises. It was about survival, and her survival, it seemed, was to be bartered for the survival of her family. She had never been courted. She had never held a boy's hand or felt the warmth of a kind gaze meant only for her. The world of men was a world of gruff commands, of tired sighs, of the smell of sweat and soil. Tenderness was a luxury as foreign as silk sheets or porcelain dolls. Her heart was a still, quiet place, untouched by the flutters and fevers she'd heard other girls whisper about. It was a place she had learned to keep locked away. For what good was a soft heart in a hard world? All it did was get bruised. The driver, a taciturn man named Silas with a tobacco-stained beard, hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to her the entire journey. He had pointed out a distant smudge of trees once, saying, "Cottonwoods means water." But mostly he just drove. The reins held loosely in his gloved hands. His presence as unremarkable as the dust devils that danced across the plains. "We're here," he said, his voice a low rumble. The carriage jolted to a stop. The sudden silence was more jarring than the constant noise had been. The only sound was the incessant wind whistling a mournful tune around the corners of the carriage. Evelyn's heart, which had been a dull, steady drum of anxiety, began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She took a shallow breath, the air thick with heat and dust. She did not move. It felt as if moving would make it real. As long as she sat here in the dim, stuffy confines of the carriage, she was still just a girl on a journey. The moment her foot touched that soil, she would be a wife. After a long moment, Silas cleared his throat. "He's coming." Slowly, forcing her rigid fingers to unclench, Evelyn leaned forward and pushed aside the canvas flap. The light was blinding, and she blinked, her eyes watering. Before her stood a small, sturdy cabin built of rough honeyed logs, chinked with mud and straw. It looked as though it had grown out of the earth itself, hunkered down low to brace against the wind. A thin curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, the only sign of life. Beside it stood a barn, its wood weathered to a silver gray, and beyond that nothing but the endless, undulating land, plowed into neat, dark furrows that stretched toward the horizon. And then she saw him. He wasn't standing on the porch to greet her. He was walking from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his trousers. He moved with an unhurried, deliberate pace, his shoulders broad under a faded linen shirt. He was tall, but the vastness of the land seemed to diminish him. As he drew closer, she took in the details with the sharp, terrified clarity of a cornered animal. His name was Caleb. That was all she knew. Caleb Thorne. His face was not unkind, but it was a fortress. It was weathered and tanned by the sun, carved with lines of labor, not laughter. His jaw was firm, his mouth a straight, unsmiling line. His hair was the color of dark soil, long enough to brush the color of his shirt, but it was his eyes that held her. They were a pale, clear blue, the color of the sky on a cold winter morning, and they seemed to absorb the light without reflecting any of it back. They looked at her not with welcome, nor with desire, but with a flat, assessing gaze. It was the look a man gives a field he must plow, or a tool he must mend. It was a look of practicality, devoid of all emotion. There was a strength in him, a solid, rooted quality, like an old oak that had withstood 100 storms. But there was no warmth. He was a man made of earth and stone and silence. Silas climbed down from his seat, his joints cracking in protest. He spoke to Caleb in a low voice, saying he had brought her safe, just as promised. Caleb gave one curt nod and reached into his pocket. A few coins changed hands. The exchange was quick and quiet, like any other simple business. Silas set Evelyn's small canvas satchel on the ground, tipped his hat, and drove away. The carriage disappeared in a cloud of red dust, taking with it the last living connection to the world Evelyn had known. The silence that followed felt immense. The land stretched around her in every direction, empty and unforgiving. She had never felt so alone. She remained frozen on the carriage bench until Caleb finally spoke. His voice was deep and steady, with no softness in it. He told her she could get out. It was not a request. It was simply the next step. Her legs felt heavy as she gathered her skirts and climbed down. The dirt shifted beneath her boots. She stood there, small and uncertain, while he picked up her satchel as if it weighed nothing and turned toward the cabin. He told her to follow. She did, each step feeling like a march toward something final. There was no wedding, no preacher, no witnesses. Her marriage was this walk from the carriage to the cabin door. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of wood smoke and pine. The space was simple and clean. A stone hearth glowed softly. A solid table stood in the center with 2 chairs. Against the far wall was a bed, her eyes fixed on it, her breath catching in her throat. It felt like a sentence waiting to be carried out. Caleb moved as if she were not there. He stirred a pot over the fire and told her there was food. She sat because he told her to sit. They ate in complete silence. The stew tasted of venison and roots, but fear stole all flavor from her mouth. She could hear her own heartbeat louder than the crackle of the fire. When he finished eating, he washed the bowls and set them aside. He said he needed to check the animals and stepped back outside, leaving her alone. The waiting was worse than anything she had imagined. The bed loomed in the dim light, a constant reminder of what she believed was coming. She changed into her plain nightgown with shaking hands and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the floor. When he returned, she flinched at the sound of the door. He added a log to the fire and turned to look at her. His gaze traveled over her stiff posture and clenched hands. He told her the floor was cold and said she should get under the quilt. She obeyed, confused and terrified. Then he did something she had not expected. He took a blanket from a wooden chest, spread it on the floor by the hearth, and lay down there with his back to her. He did not touch her. He did not speak again. He went to sleep on the floor. Evelyn lay awake for a long time, staring into the darkness. The realization slowly settled over her. He was not coming to the bed. He had chosen to leave her space. The kindness of it struck her harder than cruelty ever could. Tears slid silently into her pillow as she cried herself into sleep. Morning light woke her. Caleb was already gone, working outside. The blanket was folded neatly on the chest. Something inside her had shifted. though she did not yet understand what it meant. The days that followed fell into a quiet pattern. She cooked, he worked. They ate in silence. Every night, he slept on the floor. He never explained. She never asked. Her hands grew rough with labor. Cooking was difficult at first. Bread burned. Stew failed. She waited each night for anger or complaint, but he ate everything without a word. His silence was confusing, almost painful. She did not know if it was patience or indifference. One afternoon, she burned her hand badly on a skillet. The pain was sharp and blinding. Caleb came in, saw what had happened, and without speaking, led her to water. He held her hand gently under the cool stream. He dressed the burn with salve and clean cloth, his touch careful and precise. He did not scold her. He simply helped her. That small act stayed with her long after the pain faded. The silence between them slowly changed. It was still there, but it no longer felt empty. She noticed small things about him. The way he worked until dark. The way he fixed what was broken instead of speaking about it. When he saw a bruise on her wrist one day and quietly asked who caused it, she could not answer. He did not press her. He accepted her silence and turned his attention to fixing a loose hinge instead. Spring came quietly. Work increased. One morning he told her to get her shawl and took her to town. He bought seed, supplies, and without a word, a bolt of blue fabric. He left it for her on the table and walked away. She held it like a treasure. She sewed late into the nights, creating a dress that felt like a piece of a new self. When she wore it to town, people stared. Whispers followed her. Caleb placed a steady hand at her back, shielding her without words. Later, he bought her a honey cake. She smiled for the first time in years. He watched her as if the sight mattered more than he could say. Summer tested her strength. She worked too hard in the heat and collapsed in the garden. Caleb carried her inside and cared for her with quiet worry. That night, she saw him sitting alone on the porch, burdened and still. She realized then that he cared for her deeply, even if he did not know how to show it with words. The distance between them had narrowed, though neither had crossed it yet. Trust was growing, slow and fragile, like a seed in dry ground. And without knowing it, both of them were moving toward a moment that would change everything. The storm came in fast, darkening the sky and pressing the air low and heavy against the land. Evelyn heard the distressed sound from the barn and ran toward it without thinking. Their milk cow was in trouble, labor begun too early and going wrong. Fear wrapped tight around her chest, but there was no time to wait. Caleb was far out on the property. The sky promised rain and lightning. The animal's life, and the calf's, depended on action now. Evelyn forced herself into the stall. Her hands shook, but her voice stayed steady as she spoke softly to the animal. She cleaned her arms, worked through terror, pain, and doubt, and fought against her own weakness. It was brutal work. Sweat and dirt covered her. Her muscles burned. But she did not stop. When the barn door finally opened and Caleb appeared, soaked from the rain, he did not rush in. He stood still and watched her. In his eyes, she saw something new. Respect. When the calf was finally born and cried out weak but alive, Evelyn sank back, exhausted. Caleb knelt beside her and told her she had done well. Then he spoke her name for the first time. Evelyn! It changed something deep inside her. After that day, the silence between them softened. He spoke her name often. She learned his habits. He noticed her efforts. They moved like partners, even without many words. But her old fear did not fully leave her. In town, she overheard cruel whispers. People said she was not a real wife, that he slept on the floor because he did not want her. The words cut deep. That night, she decided she was holding him back. She wrote a letter releasing him and went to the barn to leave. He found her there. He listened as she broke apart, telling him she was broken and unworthy. When she finished, he told her the truth, that the house had been empty before she came, that if she left, it would not be a home anymore. He held her hand, trembling. and told her he was choosing her, not out of duty, but because he wanted her. When she said she was not whole, he answered that he did not want perfect. He wanted her. She finally let herself fall into his arms. He burned her farewell letter in the hearth, and that night, for the first time, he did not sleep on the floor. He lay beside her without touching, giving her choice and space. She slept in his bed not from fear, but from trust. Weeks later, he asked for a real wedding, one without debts or bargains. She said yes. They stood outside the cabin under a wide blue sky with only a preacher and 2 neighbors. She wore her blue dress. Their rings were braided thread, brown and blue, earth and sky. When she spoke her vows, she saw herself reflected in his eyes, not as broken, but as strong and whole. Life after that was quiet and steady, not perfect, but real. One evening, as she lit the oil lamp, Caleb placed a gentle hand on her back. She did not flinch. She leaned into him. The light filled the cabin. The wind outside had softened. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn knew she was safe.